Hello, everyone. This is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, coming to you from the mighty Rogue River in Southern Oregon with the Secret of Light discussion group who studies Walter Russell's and all things that have to do with the wave, both radiation and gravitation. Um, Today, we're going to talk about one of the things that we've been trying to get to for the entire book. We've almost been in this group for a year now. Isn't that amazing that we started somewhere back in March and now we're almost getting back to there? But we are on the end of the book. I think maybe next week may be our last meeting when we finish up the book, and we're going to have to look for something new to study. But right now, we're going to talk about the universal octave, and it's amazing. Some of you know I met with Rebecca Dawson last week, and who's a channeler for Serapis Bay, and kind of got a little bit of insight on what my purpose and journey is. And also, once that happened, it seemed like a lot of synchronicities actually began and came into play. Because one of the things I was really looking for is that I am not a master musician, as Grant knows. I do have a guitar, but Grant helps me tune it and actually string it. So it's not as though I know much about music. I do know some notes and some chords. But one of the things in order to talk about this octave was I really wanted to understand some music theory and some ideas about music. And you know what came about? Alphabetic put on their talk last week where they had a gentleman that gave quite a interesting talk on music and music theory, which was, helped me a lot. I'm going to share some of that today. Also, I came in contact with another person within the alphabetic group who pointed me towards his name is Robert Grant, Robert Edward Grant, who is very good. He knows both Steiner, or is familiar with Steiner's work and Walter Russell's work, and is a master mathematician. He also comes out of the pharmaceutical business, where he is actually looking at new ways of what he calls electroceuticals versus pharmaceuticals, where he's looking at how to use electricity and energy to form new ways of healing with light, sound. I'd almost call it, eneroceuticals, right? Energy-ceuticals, using different forms of energy to heal. So a lot of information came my way to really help me. So I'm very appreciative to all those who brought that. So with that, let's get started here. So this is the universal octave. We're in part 3 of The Secret of Light by Walter Russell. This is where he shares most of his diagrams and his own discussions. So everything we discuss here is the work. This is a PDF of the book of The Secret of Light. We've chosen for this part just to actually read through the book. I've added some diagrams because some of the diagrams he presented weren't quite clear, and I think I've chosen some color diagrams that had color introduced so that I think they're easier to understand. So let's get started. So the heartbeat of the universe, starting from zero of rest, spirals from its minimum to its maximum and back again to zero. And we see that when we see this, what we call the vortexes here of these spiraling waves that are going to zero and going back up again. So they come back and they go back. So this is what we call radiation and gravitation. Now, one thing I will say, I'm going to diss Walter a bit here, is that some things that make Walter very difficult to understand is that he uses synonyms for the same terms, and he doesn't really define the synonyms anywhere in particular. So you have to go through and read the whole book and create your own list of synonyms for words. So like he'll call it's a centripetal wave. Well, it's also a gravitational wave, and it's also a negative, and it's also the father, and it's also red. So he has a lot of these same names that he uses over and over again, but he doesn't really if he just said like it's a positive gravitational wave, it would solve a lot, right? Or if he said it's a negative radiation wave or a female negative radiation. I mean, but he uses those terms and he kind of chooses them where he wants. And so he intersperses them throughout the book. And it really takes a little bit of time to understand these terms where you really begin to get the drift of what he's saying. So it almost seems like he could maybe condense it down a bit. use the same term and then maybe have a glossary or something saying radiation also means this, gravitation also means this, rather than keep interspersing these words and it's kind of hard to follow. It also goes when we talk about what we would call the dynamic and the static axes, which he talks quite a bit about. So a static axis is actually what we call an east-west axis, and that can kind of move. Then we have a dynamic axis that actually runs through the center or through the poles. And we're going to talk about that because he later calls this dynamic axis a gravitational axis in some of the diagrams. So we're going to have to be aware. So I'm going to try to keep us informed about some of the terms that may be interchangeable or synonyms, as I've said, as we go through and talk about this. So, so these spirals form its minimum to its maximum and back again to zero in 4 pairs of opposite actions and reactions. These 4 pairs of opposite electric interweavers constitute the universal spiral wave by means of which the dynamic universe of effect rises from the static universe of cause. So the static universe of cause is really the stillness, and the dynamic universe is the effect. And I think I shared with Doug a quote from Walter that says that man does not understand the cause. He sees the effect and tries to interpret the cause by his sensing. So we'll see an effect, like we may see a ring around the moon or a ring around the sun, or we may see some abnormality in the sky, and we think that our senses are perceiving, and from that perception we can develop the cause. And Walter's saying, no, that's what you'd call empiricism, right? We're trying to measure something through some type of sensing structure we have, whether it be taste, feel, hearing, whatever. We're trying to interpret that data with our mind. And Walter's told us the whole time is, no, that's not what we need to do. What we need to do is actually go in, develop a sense of knowing, understand the cause, which is the stillness of the magnetic light of God or source, and how that affects based on the wave function and structure. And from that, then we will know the cause. But from what he says, most men, or almost all men, cannot understand cause. They only see effect. And what the effect is motion. And motion is not life. We've talked about that before. So we don't want to be fooled by this idea of the cosmic pendulum where we have inhalation and exhalation. So again, here's another synonym. Inhalation is gravitation. It is life. It is positive. It is hot. It is red, right? Then we have exhalation. It is negative. It is female. It is radiation. It is blue. It is cold. So when you see those terms, you have the inhalation and you have the exhalation, but you also have a third state. And that third state is the zero or the rest point. So you can almost think about this as I inhale, I'm breathing in life. As I exhale, I'm breathing out death. Now that death may be life for other forms, right? Because as I breathe out my breath, the plants will actually take in that carbon, right? And they'll actually use that to photosynthesize and turn it back to oxygen. And so their waste product is what we need. So there is this constant universal inhalation, exhalation, but it's also a symbiotic relationship. I did see somewhere where I was listening to a video where it said that that humans were a parasite on the earth. Well, we can't really be a parasite if we actually have this symbiotic relationship of inhaling and exhaling with plants that are actually feeding on what we do. So we do have tendencies to be parasitic. I would say that we have to be very poor caretakers, but I don't believe that we're parasitic. I do believe that we have a symbiosis. We have a purpose. We just kind of forgot what that purpose is. So this is the what he calls the cosmic pendulum, and I'm going to have a better view of this that we're going to talk about a little bit. But one thing before I go, I just want to talk about what is the 0 point, right? The 0 point is the point of rest. And Walter says that we really can't achieve this 0 point of rest because we're in motion, but between breaths, I can always hold my breath, right? And in that stillness of holding that breath, there is some magic that takes place. And this is what happens with the Wim Hof method of breathing. As we inhale, as we exhale, we get to a point where we can hold our breaths and get to a stillness. And I'm a practitioner of Wim Hof. Some people don't like it because of what it does to yourself, but I do find that when I'm in that stillness, I can actually put myself in greater depths of meditation, because when I am holding my breath, I am totally in the present. You know, only thing I can think about is my next breath. I'm here right now, and the more you get into Wim Hof breathing, the more you begin to feel your body, the more you begin to feel present, and it will lead to longer states of being able to hold your breath. And in that, I really enjoy. I feel that I can actually get into these deeper states of meditation. So here's a better view of what we just looked at, which is, again, the cosmic clock. And creation is but a swing of the cosmic pendulum from inertia through energy and back again to inertia forever and ever. It is but a series of opposing pulsations of action and reactions, integration and disintegration. So again, integration, disintegration, gravitation, radiation, appearance, and disappearance. So right there, he uses 3 synonyms for the same thing. Right? So these words are all the same. So the law is positive electricity is force generated against pressure resistance. Now, this is something that Bear talked a lot about last week, about the pressure resistance, that as the waves get closer and closer to the Earth, the pressure on the wave gets greater and greater, and that's what forces light. Actually, forces light into matter. Is this pressure is because gravitation is an outward force that's compressing down and in. It's not a force from the center of the Earth, at least in Russell's terms, that's pulling us, right? It's pushing us down. It's pushing us, and radiation is pushing outward. So from the center out. That's why some of the most harmful elements are in the center of the Earth for us. So the radioactive materials are in the Earth. That's why they're there. They actually form their purpose is actually to break things down. So they're breaking down the soil, they're breaking down rock, they're breaking down all these things in the Earth because they have this highly radioactive quality that it's wanting to disperse, wanting to expand, wanting to break down, not wanting to compress, but wanting to break down. That's why they're located in the Earth. And what Russell says is that once we bring those to the surface, we cause a lot of damage because that's not where they're meant to be. And then what they put off is a very destructive wave. So the idea of these radioactive elements that are in the Earth are there to actually process the Earth, to process the stone and the earth into, they actually say the stone into water and so on and so forth. But these are the elements that cause oils and things like that. There are not fossil fuels. It's just the Earth breaking itself down through these radiation and radioactive qualities that are inside the Earth in its center, where the radiation is the greatest, and also the gravitation. So we have the greatest compression because it's at the center, but it's also at the beginning of the radiation, right? So we go down to the very center to compress, and then we begin the radiation, and that is where the radiation qualities are the highest as we move out. So with that, we have the law of the positive electric force, which is the gravitational wave. And then the law for the negative electric force is the radiative wave in the direction of pressure resistance. Negative intensity decreases with expansions due to pressure resistance in streams flowing in the same direction. Negatively, electricity is the dissipating, separating exothermic force of expansion, which seeks lower pressures. So the idea here is that as the waves come from the sun, they go to the earth. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. There is a curvature of a cone shape that they come through and they begin to condense and condense and condense until they get to the center. Then they begin to radiate back out through the earth, back to the sun, and they begin to expand into lesser and lesser density as they go out. And that is what we call space, and that's why the volume and the size of the wave gets larger and larger as it goes farther out, and the wave becomes denser and denser as it comes down to the earth. And so within that, we see this spiral that is happening here. So this spiral is what we call the vortex. We've talked about this before. Now, as we look at this vortex, we only see it in 2 dimensions, right? If you see this vortex in 3 dimensions, it actually looks conical like this, right? So imagine looking at this shape right here, but only from the top. So we're only seeing it really in these 2 dimensions. And it begins to spiral out, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. Now, within this spiral, this is what we call the cosmic pendulum. So the pendulum swings one way and then the other, right? And in the center is 0. But on each side of that is what? We have red and we have blue or violet, right? This is what we talk about when we talk about the red shift, blue shift, right? This is where this occurs, a red shift, blue shift, right? Going all the way out to yellow and back again, depending on what side of the shift we're on. So as we shift this way, we go to the violet, to the blue, to the green, right? Because yellow and blue make green, right? If we go this way, we go red to, this is like a red violet to red to orange, back to yellow. But as we shift back, right, since this is the red side, red and yellow make orange, right? We come back to 0 again. So this is the pressure resistant side, right? That contracts. This is the pressure resistant side of expansion. So that's why we say that the radiative side, the female side, is blue. It is the expansive side, right? This is where we get these colors, right? If we go this way, we get the red. This is the pressure or resistance side. So it's positive. That's why you see the 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus, right? Positive side, negative side. So as we begin to look at this, we also begin to see that he calls this the cosmic clock, right? And it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Back to 3, 2, 1, 0. Well, what is that right there? That is the universal octave, right? We have 4 back to 0. So when we talk about this, these colors actually will align with these numbers that we look at here, but they also align with the notes of the octave. So the notes relate to color, and they also relate to the elements of the earth. So you can actually look at color as a sound that we see but don't hear, and notes as a color or light. So you can look at color as a light that we see, right, but don't hear. And we can look at sound as a light that we hear but don't see. So this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that whatever propagation the wave is taking, right, whatever its function within the octave is maybe picked up by different senses that we may have. So our eyes will actually resonate with certain octaves or frequencies to pick up light, right, color. If the wave is not at a higher frequency, it's at a lower frequency, then we will actually use our eardrums to hear that vibration. We won't see it. And you ask, what's faster, the speed of light or the speed of sound? Supposedly, neither moves, right? It's really just the propagation along the wave. There is no motion along. There is no true speed of light. It's really how how these, what we would call corpuscles, we got in this discussion a little bit earlier, also, as this energy is moving back and forth on the wave, there are not little particles that are moving. It's really just thinking about, like, say, in a stadium where you have a wave, right? The people aren't moving, right? They are just standing up, right? So when you see that wave, what's happening is that wave is just being opened or operated or enlightened at that point. So as this energy moves along this area, it's not moving, but points along that wave are moving, just as that wave in the stadium is, but the people are not. So we get this sense of motion when there is really no motion. It's really just this lighting up and, charging, discharging, charging, discharging, charging, discharging. So what, the abilities that we have are based on our senses to pick up these different wave forms and in different wave conditions. So there may be things like gases that we can't see, we can't hear. We may be able to smell them. They may have different, but even like, say, they add garlic to propane to make it smell the way it does. That's that smell. When you smell gas, you smell propane. It really doesn't have a smell that we can pick up. So certain things will have smells that we can pick up, but those are usually due to the other chemicals that are in them or properties they have. A lot of the gas are, tasteless and odorless also. So based on what our senses, our faculties are, is really what we have, that what we can do to actually see these different elements, hear them, or actually experience them. So again, this is the cosmic pendulum again. Negative electricity flows with streams. So we have, it's flowing here, flowing there, right? They're flowing in opposite but equal directions. But that force will vary based upon the volume that it goes into. So as the gravitational waves come to the center, they become very condensed. The volume becomes very small, say like within a planet. As that turns back out into the radiation and it goes back out into space, it becomes very vast, so the volume increases. So you can have the same mass, but different volumes. So all effects of motion are orderly and periodic. The cosmic pendulum unfailingly records and adjusts all periodicities, right? So what I want to really express here is that there is a direct correlation between sound, sight, light, right, and the periodic table that we're going to get into a little bit now. And again, it's based on this redshift, blue shift, positive, negative, father, mother, so on and so forth. So the gravity center of everything is its center of mind control. Electric potential and gravity are 90 degrees in opposition. So electric potential and gravity are at 90 degrees. And we talked about this a few weeks back with the static and dynamic axes, as you can remember. So again, this is where I'm going to get back into, these terms. So now we have an axis of gravity. Well, that axis of gravity is what we actually would call the dynamic axis in some of our other drawings. You can remember that, right? It ran through the center. You remember that? And it was static, and it was it's called the centering shaft also of the vortex. We called it the centering shaft also. So this axis of gravity runs through here, and these other waves, right, are at 90 degrees. Well, why are they at 90 degrees? Well, I don't know if I have something I can draw with here. I don't think I have something that's very curvilinear, but that's not what I wanted.
Right angles.
See, well, what is going on here? That shouldn't be that. Yeah, let me just use this one. So as this, goes up, right, then it comes back down, it will go up and down, right, like a wave, right?
Sine wave.
So it goes up and down. Yeah, it's going to be more curvilinear though than that, right? But because that's really a transverse wave, but it's going to be a 90 degrees, to this, and so it's going to form that sine wave, right? As it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, right? So that wave is going to be at 90 degrees. This is the mind and motion universe. So we have the white magnetic light here, right? Which is again, 0 point. The helium, right? The DO, right? Then we have lithium, which is red violet. Then we have red. Then we have orange. Then we have yellow. Then we have green. Then we have blue. Then we have blue violet, so on. I think this is a bit different than these colors that were given here. I think that this is actually moved over to here more, but so with this, they have a correspondence not only to the colors, but also to these, what we'd call, these, some of these, like helium is at the 0 point, so that would actually be called an inert gas because they're at 0 point. And then we have lithium, barium, boron, and in the center we have carbon, right? Carbon is what we're made of. Carbon is a carbon-based form. So we see carbon, right? We can touch, we can feel, we can see carbon. It is within our spectral analysis of our eyes. Can we see lithium? I don't think so. Barium, some of these things we may or may not be able to see based on, again, what is going to come into our frame of reference based on whatever side of the wave these are on. If there are lithium beams, we are never going to see a lithium beam within our frame of reference. We may be able to identify it as a gas, but we'll never be able to see its true form. Like we were talking about earlier, maybe as we develop our other subtle bodies, beings that may be in these other spectrums of either sound or light. We can't hear all sounds either, right? We have a very limited range of sound. I think the lowest range we can hear, I think, is 27, maybe. I think that's what an A is, where it starts off. We'll get to that in a second, but that was supposedly the lowest range of sound that we could hear. So with this, we have all of these colors, again, with yellow being in the center. And it was amazing because I did a lot of work. I oversaw the writing of the California Building Code for what they call the accessibility portion, in which we combine the federal ADA laws with the California state laws to create the building code for how could we meet the ADA requirements within the built structure. And one of the things that was looked at was, I don't know, not many people have them, but in California we have what they call these tactile warnings that are on curb ramps and things, which are these little bumpy things. And there was quite a bit of discussion about what color they had to be, and some people wanted them to be like different colors based on, say, a color scheme that might be for that city or county or whatever. But the actual law came down that they had to be federal yellow. And the reason they had to be a federal yellow was this was the last color that is seen when someone goes blind. So it's kind of amazing that that's within the carbon spectrum, and that is the last color we also see as we go blind. So that's, if you ever see those tactile warnings, what they call detectable warnings, and you see yellow and it's called federal yellow, the reason is because that's the last color that the blind see before they go all the way blind. So within that, also, we have the do, this says te, mi, fa, mi, re, do, right? And all these also relate to the notes. So we have C, D, E, F, G in the center, E, D, C. So mind centers and controls motion from within. So seek ye the kingdom of heaven within. So the idea is that within us, within our makeup, we have all these elements that actually have a divine nature. And once we understand the divine nature, and that's really what was talked about a bit in last week's alphabetic, was the octaves and the fifths. So for C, would start off with 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, so on and so forth. And what this is a doubling, right? So 1, times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 6, 8 times 2 is 16, 16. So an octave is just the doubling of the previous number. So again, 3, 6, 12, right? 12 times 2, 24, 24 times 2, 48. So this is the octave as we go down, right? So here's C, here's D, here's A. And I believe that 27 was the lowest number that Pythagoras said we could hear. Because he's the one who, this is called Pythagorean tuning, I believe. And so each of these actually, this is a Hertz frequency. So this frequency would match a certain note. So if you had a tuning fork, which was 144, it would match a D note. Okay. So within octaves, you also, so octave is a frequency times 2. So 2 times 216, right, is 432 for A. That's the next, that's the octave, right? So a fifth is the frequency times 3 divided by 2. So for an A at the 216, we times that by 3, that equals 648. Divide by 2 is 324, which is the next over. So we go from 216 to 324. So this is the mathematics that get us to these numbers. Now within these octaves, so this is the great octave that we're talking about, these octaves here, right? The octaves. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Well, what about, 7 and 8? Well, you begin with this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's actually 9, right? What are you missing here? I'm missing one. Oh, we go back to E and D. So we go all the way through, then we go back and end up back at C. So we go C, D, E, F, G, F, E, D, C. So within this, we actually begin to see, as was talked about a bit, we begin to see these numbers that have a very unique, and for one thing, they're all whole numbers, right? They're all what we'd call whole numbers, and they have these very distinct patterns. Like say with this one, it's 36. So, from here on out, it's divisible by 12, right? From the 36 and so on. This would be, 2/3 and so on. And we have a 12, 27, 54, and so on. So within here, we have quite a bit of division by 12 and so on. We don't really have any even like 500 or 200 or 100. They're all very much divisible by 3, 6, and 9. And as you know, that Nikola Tesla said that 3, 6, and 9, were the keys to the universe. And if man could understand the divinity of 3, 6, and 9, we'd understand the divinity of the universe. So the points that I'm trying to get at here is that within these numbers, within these frequencies, within these waves, as we begin to look at them for tone, for color, for resonance, there is a distinct and definite number that have divine synchronicities with other numbers that we may see. And some of that was talked about, within last week's talk, which was, the circumference of the Earth, the circumference of the sun, these different things based on, planetary spheres, that they had divine implications and actually tied back into the divinity of these numbers. Not only that, but the difference for years and Kali Yugas and how they related to different periods of time, that they all resonated back, especially with this 432. And this is one thing that was talked about quite a bit, was that, the tuning for instruments changed, from 432 to a higher resonance of 440. And when that happened, then that was instigated by Rockefeller to a standard tuning system, which is a much higher
Hux,
frequency. much higher frequency that actually would cause more tension in people and it would be less restful. So, there were people that played in 432. It said that the Beatles tuned to 432. They did not tune to 440. Maybe that's one reason that their music is so well liked. I don't know. But the tuning, and so there's a very big resonance between 432 and the human because of, I would say, what we call sacred geometries or, sacred forms that we resonate with because of our divine nature. So, with all these numbers, we can see again, like I said, you have these different eras and times and numbers that resonate with all these frequencies. So as you look at this, then you go, okay, well, we have these numbers. So like say for sacred geometry, what did they use? I mean, now we have what we call, the imperial. We have measures from Egypt. We have measures from Rome. We have the imperial, which is what the English use, and then then it was changed to the metric system, right? So what do all these measures have to do with anything? And there was a book that was written, and this is from a book that was written by Graham Hancock, where he's actually referencing this other book. It says, however, the approach to the subject may be simplified by simply considering the basic measure of each system, which is invariably the foot. Okay. Augustus de Morgan gave a broad hint at this method of assessment in 1847. He stated, there runs through all these national systems a certain resemblance in the measures of length, and if a bundle of rods were made of foot rules, one for every nation, ancient and modern, there would be a very unreasonable difference in length of the sticks. So what you find is as you look back into ancient structures, whether it be the pyramids or Roman, what they use, because really the Romans took a lot of the Egyptian, because why?
Sumerians used the metric system.
No, they did not. But
well, it seems like it's close anyway, no?
Well, no. Please,
okay.
Before you make statements, please make sure you know what you're saying.
I thought I read that somewhere.
Yeah, it's like you thought you read something else, which was not right? So please, please make sure you understand what you're saying before you say it. So the idea is that there were these systems that were used that when you look at them, they basically are based on a 12-unit system, which is really based upon, a 24-hour system, which is kind of like our Earth system, right? Which, when you look at this, you see a lot of instances of 12, right? Within the resonance and the octaves. You don't see resonances of 10. You see resonances of 12. And 12 has a lot of spiritual meaning and a lot of, because you can divide 12 by many numbers, right? 10, you can't, there's only a couple of numbers you can divide to actually get 10 into equal segments. So 12, 24, so on and so forth, have many divisible units. And again, the foot is basically a foot. I mean, it's almost like a foot that they would take from a statue, and that would be a foot. And an inch was almost like the digit of your finger. Like you took your middle finger and took the first digit, that's like an inch almost, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why sometimes they're called digits, right? So the base 12 system based on the divine and cosmos from which man was made in its image. So when you look at the cosmos and you look at the wave and you look at the resonance and the notes and so on and so forth, you have to look to see, okay, is this divinely inspired? And if it is, then the idea that we build towards a cosmic or divine measure, how would that affect our buildings? How would that affect everything that we create? versus, you know, if we tune to like the 440, which is not really in resonance with us. So as we begin to, look at these things, we begin to see this divine purpose, right? Is there a divine purpose? Is there a divine purpose for the radiuses and the spheres and all these things that we talk about, the orbits, the sun, the days, all these different numbers? When you really begin to look at these base systems, so a 12 base system is based on the divine, right? It's based on how man was created. You look at a base 10 system, it's based on man's hand, right? Based on the digits we have. It has no divine origin. Only what man can create with his hands and his thinking. So as we look at these two different systems, this is really a debate that was gotten into when the United States and England, right, did not want to go to the metric system because they understood that there was a divine purpose in the base 12 system.
England didn't want to go. The United States didn't want to go.
Both are on imperial, what they call imperial units.
England doesn't use metric?
As far as I know, no. They couldn't. But I know that they also fought going metric. They may be now, I don't know. But I know the United States is definitely, when you go to buy building materials, you can buy metric, but the base building materials that we use in the United States are still in the 12 system. So from this, Da Vinci created, the Vitruvian Man, right? Some people may be very familiar with the Vitruvian Man, and some may not. But the Vitruvian Man is really a, sometimes they call him the modular man. It's what there's another architect that came later called Le Corbusier, who was very much into what he would call the modular man. And this is a very old drawing, but I'm sure many people have seen this drawing of the Vitruvian Man. This is Da Vinci's drawing, in which he actually has the circle and the square and the triangle, and it's really based on the proportions of man. And it was really what they called trying to square the circle, which he really didn't do. But we're going to talk about that a bit later with the work of some other people.
What does that mean? The triangle in the beginning. What does that mean?
What, this triangle here?
Yeah, no, on the top, in the formula, like the triangle equal and then paren. That.
Well, again, it's really it's an equation that's showing that how this works, and I don't really want to get into all that because I'm not really a mathematician, all right, and I don't even know if you would understand it if I explained it. But if you want to, you can watch a video on this, because when you get down here to, like, say, the pyramid inch, and you go to Wikipedia, it says the pyramid inch is a unit measure claimed by pyramidologists, okay, whoever a pyramidologist is, right, to have been used in ancient times. Supposedly it was 25th of a sacred cubit. So 25th, right? But then when you look over here, it says citation needed.
Huh.
So what this is just crap. There's no citation. Right. Someone just put this in. But this is what, so when you get back to what Doug was saying earlier about Samaria and the metric, in my opinion, that's a lot of, misinformation. Because what I think is trying to happen here is that if there is no divinity to form, right? If there is no divinity to the sacredness of resonance, and we can change from 432 to 440 tuning, because there is no sacredness, there is no resonance with the body, there is no correlation between the divine and the body. If it's all based on, right, man's hands and what man can do with his hands, right, and it's based on digits and toes, well then, who cares what happens, right? But if things are truly divine, what we create, how we create them, and the proportions we create them in becomes very, very important, because they have direct resonance with our current condition.
I was wondering when the qubit was going to show up, because it's in the Bible.
Yes.
So
And it is
it's something that we didn't really, capture, we see it, but we don't really.
well, the cubit again is a sacred, but the funny thing is it's so difficult.
Yeah.
And even like what Doug said, that it was based on the metric system.
Oh, I see.
Not really, I mean, the cubit is, they said it's really, like from the tip of your finger to your elbow, right?
Oh,
Basically
I see.
16 inches. So what some people say, right? That's how studs are put in as a cubit. But each person's arm would vary. So there's been some work done on what the exact cubit is. And that's really, when it comes down to it, there's actually some discussion right now that it's based on the circumference of the earth and so on and so forth, divided into different parts down to different basic principles. And again, all of that's been pretty much lost.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that is what we would call sacred geometries, right? So that's why, I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I'm an anti-flat earther, but why I don't embrace flat earth. Because once you get away from a spherical earth and you get away from these geometries and you get away from these properties and you get away from these concepts, you really begin to lose the divinity of the creation and the magnificence of the creation. And you get basically down into a man-made structure that's done with metric system and digits of man's fingers and toes. And so the divinity is lost and the purpose is lost. And
is that why, like the pie, that's in a shell, or that represents divinity, no?
But the
That
concept,
spiral, like like in a shell when you.
oh, you're talking about the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the Fibonacci sequence.
So I mean, not that it's in this picture here, but
yeah, but that actually is in the spiral, and we're going to talk about the
it's
Fibonacci.
in the spiral, yeah.
And we're going to talk about that in a bit here.
Like a snail, a flower, everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, when you see that, there's divinity of design,
There's-
right? And
yeah, you can see it in nature. You can see it like
and there's divinity in geometry. And 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 one of the people we're going to talk about a little bit later here, he actually says that geometry is music we can see, and music is geometry that we can hear. So, again, based upon the resonance, the frequency, the organ that we have that allows us to actually interplay, right, with these frequencies, with these resonances, they will allow us to see, feel, touch, and taste those resonances, those frequencies. And like I said, as we become to a higher consciousness, maybe a transitionary time now, there may be new, we may have the ability to receive different frequencies and different resonances that will open us up new dimensions and new, new experiences, right? So before I move on too much within this whole thing of form and number, and I'd like to maybe touch a little bit right now on what we talk about with biogeometry. So as some of you may know, within biogeometry, we do a lot of work with pendulums. And the reason that we do the work with the pendulum is not so that we see the swing back and forth, but that we actually see the spin. And within this, Ibrahim Karim talks about the aspect of quality. So it's very difficult to say what is the quality, right, of a color. You can say, talk about its intensity, maybe that's very red or that's very blue, but what is the quality of that and what does that mean? Well, as we begin to talk a little bit here about that each of these colors also carry a resonance, also match a tone, you begin to see that these things can have qualities, right? And those
Quality
qualities,
meaning like it's the accurate to that color itself.
yeah.
What does quality mean?
Well, okay, so say you look at a rose, does it have a quality to you?
I guess, I mean, the nicer shape or something.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I mean, it has a feeling. And that is really a resonance that is built with you.
It
Right?
has an essence too.
Yeah. And so you're picking up, it's, so when you see a rose, is the rose really there? Walter Russell would say, no, it's not really. It's really, we're picking up a resonance, or we're picking up a frequency from that. So that's the quality that is there, that's not a quantity. You can say
The
how big.
thorn's there.
Yeah, the form, but
The
there's,
thorn. I mean, I bleed.
well, yes, you can, if you put your finger on it, yes, you can. And
I love roses.
but you can say that this rose is big, right? It's a certain size. That's what we'd call quantity. It's very easy to say the quantity, and that's what we'd call empirical measurement, right?
It's the smell for me more than anything.
Yeah, but how can you gauge the smell, right? Is there really, you can say that you can gauge the quantity of the smell, say, oh, that smells really strong, or that smells really weak. That's really the
Smells
quantity.
good.
But see, good, that's a quality, right? How can you gauge quality, right? You can gauge quantity. It smells really strong, smells really weak, but how can you gauge the quality, right?
It's a judgment.
Well, again, we're trying to say right now, we're trying to say that it's a judgment, but it's an inherent judgment to us. It's an innate judgment. And that judgment is based on its frequencies, right? It's based on these frequencies that resonate with us. And as we begin to modify the inherent frequencies and vibratory qualities of the earth, say by GMOs or by introducing different things, that actually change the makeup,
break us,
that are going to change the quality of our environment. Just as we take in certain aspects, we take in different things into our bodies, we take into our body things that aren't natural, right? We change the makeup of our body. That will then change our frequencies. And that then will change the quality of our existence. So that's why, as we look at the wave and we look at what resonates with us, what frequencies resonate with us, and what frequencies do not resonate with us. Because we can have a resonant frequency that is actually harmful if it's vibrating at a speed that's too much for us. So we have to be careful of what's resonating and how it resonates based on the quality of that wave. So we can have a waveform that has a benefit. This is where we get into really the basis of Rife technology.
Rife
And frequency.
And
right?
frequency, yeah. Because like the faster you vibrate or the higher you vibrate, right? That makes a difference.
Yeah, but it has to resonate, right? So that's why when you have a frequency, and it's also based on the wave and the carrier. I mean, these are different aspects. And where Rife kind of, is different than the way that I think, or the way that I've been taught, right? Or where I've come to believe, is that, he was a germ theorist. So he was into these killing of germs and so on and so forth. But he also had the other side, which was, the introduction of waves that could actually heal, right? Because they were a resonant wave of, say, a certain organ, because what he did was the biggest aspect that Rife got into was he developed a microscope that could actually see the oscillation and frequency and vibration of different organisms.
Why does no one use it now? Why doesn't it?
It was destroyed by the Rockefeller.
On purpose.
Yes. And so this, even though we still, but we have a lot of the frequencies. I mean, we already have a lot of the frequencies out there. So, I mean, that work has been done.
The spooky 2 thing, right?
Well, but I mean, that's just one form of Rife. But those frequencies can be used in different Rife machines. Because all a Rife machine really is a frequency generator.
Yep.
So once you have a generator, and then how do you put that form out? You put that form out in, the neon tubes that they use, the cathode, the tubes they use, you can put that out. You're putting that out as a color, because that tube also has a color to it, but it also has a vibrational quality and a resonance, So that's a certain waveform that's putting out. You can put it directly on the skin with what they call TENS pads, right, where it's taking the frequency and putting it directly into your skin. So there's different ways that you can introduce these frequencies, and like I said, you can have what you call healing frequencies and different frequencies, or you can introduce frequencies what they would call killing frequencies to kill these viruses. But again, you know, it really depends on whether you believe in antibiotics, right? If you want to take something and kill it, if you believe that, you know, you have parasites that need to be killed, or you just let them move through. These are all differences in what we'd call terrain theory versus germ theory. So the point I'm trying to make here is that when you get into these resonant frequencies and you get into how to make this, and we get back into what, you know, we talked about as electroceuticals or aneroceuticals, you know, energy medicine. This is where we begin to have game changers in, do we see, you know, do we see pharmaceuticals, which are really, you know, maybe chemical based, right? Which are chemistry based, so on and so forth, versus energetically based, because the energetics can have a much faster effect, because that's really what the chemical base is trying to achieve.
Like homeopathy.
Well, when you say homeopathy, it's really more, homeopathy really is a chemical based system that is trying to achieve through more natural means. But so
It's not like an energy though. I thought it was like an energy.
well, some are energy based, but not all. I mean, some are just herbs, right? So it's not. So it's like so within the herb, are you actually taking the chemical property of the herb, or are you actually getting the energetic or waveforms? You know, this is where Bear will talk a bit about, you know, spirit that he makes and so on, because you're actually capturing the energetic qualities of that. And sometimes it's easier for the body to accept energy than it is to accept the chemical form, because your body has been so deteriorated, it doesn't have the processes to accept the chemical breakdown of the thing that you're ingesting. So you really need to get just to the energetic properties.
I mean, the homeopath I work with, I mean, I am only, you know, I know nothing, but she feels like it's energetic. She used to say that you could take one tablet and make, you know, millions more, because there's really nothing there. It's the energy of it that's there.
And again, that's one practitioner, not all practitioners.
Yes.
Believe that.
Yes.
Okay.
I know very little about it.
When you use homeopathy, it's a wide topic. So so again, it really comes down to, you know, is it chemical based? Is it energy based? Is it electrical based? You know, what are we really looking at when we begin to? But again, and is there a divine purpose? Is there divine frequencies? Is there divine numbers? Is there divine structures? Is there certain aspects of our world and geometries, right, that actually resonate with us to perform health? And are there those that resonate to bring illness or dis-ease, right? I mean, when you talk about, you know, going from a 432 to a 440,
yep,
we're saying you're getting a higher tension, right? Is that going to bring ease or bring dis-ease, right? Probably going to bring dis-ease, right?
Yep.
So those are the kind of things that we probably want to avoid. We want to stay within those resonances and frequencies that would be more based on this base 12 system, which is actually within these frequencies that heal. So getting back to the whole idea of what is quality and what is quantity. So how can you test for quality, right? This is something that has never really been able to be tested before. We, you know, I mean, it could back in ancient times. I believe that the idea of quality was well known with the Pythagorean tuning, right? That was known in the 6th century BC and was changed in, you know, like the 30s with Rockefeller, right? So, you know, from the 6th century BC to 1930, we were tuning, you know, the 432, right?
Yep.
And then we went to 440. Why? Because they knew better? No.
You knew better how to kill you.
But at the same time, right? So that's when biogeometry came in, and that's Abraham Karim's big, you know, concepts, is that he believes that through biogeometry we can actually determine the quality of items. And so within his pendulums, when you look at him, so he basically has two pendulums. And the first one, it's going to be called it's called the horizontal dial. And it's basically a pendulum that is shaped kind of like it's a spherical. Let me hold a second. Let me go get one real quick.
I think I have one. Ooh, let me see. Come on. Ah. How do you open it?
So this is the horizontal pendulum. Can anybody see this?
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah. And you can
And
see
then there's the other one, right?
and then you can see the shape. And
It's
then
so cool.
and then on top you have, these dials, right? So on these dials, here's what's on the dials, as you can see here. So what you really have is the color spectrum. And what you do is you take
Wow.
this little pointer and you point to whatever color it is that you want, or you want to douse for. Now, this is where I've talked about it many times, but I want to make it clear because I don't know who's watching. They may have not have watched the old ones. So there's two types of dowsing. This is called radiesthesia when you use these pendulums, versus when you say, like, maybe use a neutral pendulum like this, and you would ask it questions, yes and no answers. So, my shirt is red. It goes back and forth. My shirt is green. Goes forward and back as a yes. So that's mental dowsing. I'm asking it a question and it's verifying the answer. So
That's a different kind of pendulum than the second one.
yes, the second one's just a round, what they call a neutral pendulum. Just
Has
round.
no dials or anything.
No dials. It's just made for mental dowsing or for radiesthesia, for how the body works. So when you look at the horizontal pendulum, this is how you verify quality. So you can go through and see. So on this one, you'd have BU is blue, I is indigo, V is violet, UV is ultraviolet, W is white, negative G is negative green, B is black, IR is infrared, R is red, O is orange, and Y is yellow. Now these colors, right, reflect the colors that are being used here. So let's read through this real quick. So you can use the horizontal dial pendulum to detect BG3. So what BG3 is the three qualities that Ibrahim Karim found to be the most beneficial. He found this quality in the Coptic tombs of the tombs of Coptic Christian saints, which was a very high resonance. And so in order to detect the higher harmonic of gold, you must make two separate measures for one. So if you want to find the higher harmonic of gold, you would set it to orange and test for orange. And then you would also test for indigo, for blue. So these two together would form what he would call the higher harmonic, or the quality of gold. Okay. So as I talked about, radiesthesia differs from mental dowsing. When you use the rods, to douse for water, you're asking, is there water here? And it's telling you yes or no, there is water here. When you use radiesthesia, you are the antenna. So you are bringing these qualities through your body to the pendulum, and the pendulum is registering. So you and the pendulum are one, and the quality is being associated to how you set the pendulum.
You turn it to where you're looking for something.
Yes, and you put it over it. If it spins to the right, it's there. If it does not spin, it's not there. So if you put it over an item, you can even do it with just a piece of paper, a red piece of paper. You put it on red, it should spin to the right on a red piece of paper if you have it set to red. If you have it set to R. And I do this. This is what I do. I mean, I do this all the time. This is how I find qualities. I do this with many things. So, and then, but you get back to, what are you trying to find? You're trying to find these resonances, right? You're trying to find these color resonances within. Now, could you use a tuning fork? Sure, maybe you could hit a tuning fork but how is the other thing going to resonate, right? It's really difficult to see. So this is one of the only ways I know how to determine the quality of an item. And it gets back to the waveform, it gets back to the color, it gets back to the tone, so on and so forth.
Very
So-
confusing.
In what way?
Well, like I mean, you said it, the quality is just confusing.
Well,
It's
again,
new. I should say it's new and not confusing.
yeah, and then and what I want you to understand is that this gets back to these waveforms and harmonics, right? So again, the higher harmonic of gold. So what's a harmonic, right? It's a vibration, the frequency, right? So within orange, it would actually be the law, right? LA, right here. That's what this would be, right? Indigo would probably be, a blue over here, right? So it'd be the ray, right? So within those harmonics, that would be the higher harmonic of gold, right? Ultraviolet, we already have that one, right? And negative green. So when these three aspects are put together, there is a tonal quality, right? Where you're actually registering with the divine aspects of a tonal field. But you're registering that through a device that's measuring that. You really can't, this is a way in which you're serving as an antenna to communicate or to, divine, I would say, you're divining what quality that element has. Because you're using a divine source to try to reach to the divine to pull that through. So that's the power of biogeometry. So, with this, this is for the horizontal pendulum. The other pendulum that we have, is what we call the vertical pendulum, which is a bit different in its aspect, is that it looks like this. So it has two dials because it has two directions, right, up and down, and you can see it here, right? Can you see that? And you can see it in the picture.
Wow, that's a
But-
big one.
Yeah, but it has two dials because they're set differently, and it also has a bottom indicator. So on the top disc, you point one dial straight up, and then you can point the other. This is to actually find like a negative green. So then you point the other one here. So this is when you're dowsing for like detrimental energy. So you use this one when you're looking for detrimental energy. Now I will caution that the person I learned from, Robert Gilbert, who is one of the sanctioned teachers by Ibrahim Karim in the United States, he said that they were actually moving away from using this pendulum to identify the Hartman-Curry and the Binker lines, because when you use this pendulum, like I said, you are the antenna. So when you're using it, you're actually pulling these negative forces through you. And so what they found was some people were getting sick actually from using this, and they actually went to locating these lines with a neutral pendulum, and as they walked over the line, if it was a detrimental line, it would spin in reverse. And that way they weren't really accepting all the energies that were coming through the pendulum, and they would just use the pendulum to actually identify if it was a Hartman or a Curry line. And that can be done by attaching these antennas to the bottom side down here. And you could use the red to identify a Curry line, which is basically a 45-degree line, or you can use the yellow to a Hartman line, which is at 90 degrees, and they run about 3'2" on center. And then a Binker line actually is a horizontal line that runs through at about 10 foot on center. So these pendulums are actually used to actually, identify the quality of the energy. And I wanted to explain that kind of because we're in that waveform now and how those colors relate to that quality. Any questions on that before I move on?
Wow.
Okay, so the octave wave formula, which governs all motion and its birth position in the universal wave, is as follows: 68. Okay, we talked about this, right? 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Degeneration, or radiation, or negative, or female, or blue, right? Or mother. These are all ideas that we give, or synonyms we use for this same word. On the other side of the octave is generation, is gravitation, is positive, is father, is male, right? Is red, right? These are the things we talk about. So as you see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. This is the 9 points of the octaves. It returns from 1, coming from 0 back to 0 again. 0 to 4 means it's in triple direction toward the apex of the spiral. So we're spiraling, right? We're spiraling in, we're spiraling in from 0 to the center or the apex, which leads to higher potential density. So as we get to this point here, we are at our highest density, right? We're at the biggest compression of the wave at this point, which leads to higher potential, density, gravity, and the white heat of incandescence. So this is what Russell says is how a sun is formed. This compressive gravitational force is what compresses and creates this white light of sun. But once it gets to this point, it then has to release that which it borrowed, and it goes back into the degenerative force, which is the radiative force. So as the sun condenses, it radiates out to the earth, right? That radiation comes to the earth, radiating until it gets to a conical energy field where it will then begin to condense back and gravitate back to the center of the sphere, where once it hits the center of the earth, it will then begin to gravitate, to radiate back out, back towards the sun, where it will then return back into the sun. So 4 to 0 means the centrifugal direction towards the base of the spiral, which leads to lower pressure, lower potentiality, vacuity, radioactivity, and black hole to space. Each of this is a half cycle. And we talked about that within the wave of what the cycle of the wave was. We're going to cover that just a little bit more as we move down. The reason an octave cannot be counted from 1 to 8 instead of from 1 to 4 is because each of the pressures which bear the relations of 1 to 4 positive in the octave is credit pressure, which has its equal opposite debit pressure in our 4 negative. So again, credit pressure. What is credit pressure? Credit pressure is generation, another synonym, right? Debit pressure, degeneration, negative, right? But the reason we can't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is because it's not built that way. It's built from 0 to 4, back to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. You never hear anybody talk about when they're dancing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This is the way it works within the octave.
Well, actually, I just want to mention from a musical perspective, if you did want to count to 8, it would be like 1E and a 2E and a 3. Yeah.
But again, that you're still doing the same thing, but it's not.
But yeah, you're typically counting your measures, and they're usually 4.
Yeah.
Unless you're in 3/4 time.
Yes, that's a different situation. The elements of matter born on the spiral pairs of opposites at tones have the same relations as tones of music have to the octave wave, right? So the elements of matter on the spiral pairs of opposite as tones have the same relations as tones of the music have to. So what are we saying here? We're saying that the tones of music, right, have the same relationship, right, to the tones as the physical elements of matter. All wave motion is expressed in 8 tones, 4 pairs of opposites. The middle pair is seemingly 1. The octave is usually expressed as 7 for this reason. An octave is a series of orderly harmonic tones. Tones are multiplied and divided pressures of light. So tones are multiplied and divided pressures of light. spaced rhythmically with a mathematical precision upon each octave wave of motion. The law which applies to one effect of motion applies to all, whether sound wave, electric current, color spectrum, or octave waves of matter. So as we get back into this, as we talk about these laws, as we talk about all these things actually have a common point, and where does that common point originate from? If we, if we don't use divine beginnings, right, within the divine spectrum, where was that going to lead? And so as we get away from base 12 pairs, as we get away from, Pythagorean tuning and all these different ideas, we begin to lose the divinity of the creation. And this is what leads us into scientific materialism. Because once we lose the divinity of creation, we lose the divinity within us, and we are reduced to animals and only electric bodies that function from current and where life is movement and not divine. We've talked about that in previous lectures and discussion. So as we, so no state of motion has permanence or even duration. Everything is forever in a state of transition, changing its position and its wave by either multiplying or dividing its vibrational frequencies to change its conditioning. So what this is saying is that there's nothing, this is what we would actually call the law of evolution. And when I say evolution, I don't mean from a monkey to a man. I just say that a man is in constant change. The earth is in constant change. Everything is in constant change. That is the law of evolution. It is either evolving or devolving. It is either gravitating or radiating. It is doing one or the other. It is never in stasis. And that's why maybe sometimes the idea of, of a perfect world, right? Once you get to perfection, what do you do next?
Break it.
Can you be in stasis, right? It's always going to be changing. It's always going to be evolving. So there is no true perfection. There's only a state of desire for perfection, right? The desire to do well, because you can never get to this perfect state, because once you do, what next? Either you're going to devolve or evolve. That's kind of where we're at now, right? We're in this state where we're either going to evolve or devolve. It's our choice.
Well, I think we've been devolving, though. They've been taking away all natural things from us. Well, we're allowing it to.
And that is, some of that, like I said, is why is that? It could be because we got away from the idea that all things have a divine purpose. All things are created with a divine intent. Once you begin to move into systems that no longer function on divine and resonate with the divine and resonate with these harmonics that we've talked about, you're gonna devolve. You're gonna devolve at least away from a divine structure. You may evolve into a scientific materialism. That's really going to be, a judgment call on whether or not that's what you want to do or not. For some, that would be a horrible thing. For others, they think that's okay, right? But as we do, we begin to, get out of resonance with divine purpose.
It's crazy, like how they used to be so careful when they found land and they, where they're going to put a house and counting, and now they just throw it anywhere. Then they wonder why they don't feel well. It's crazy.
The basis of all octaves is a keynote of rest, which the octave. Go ahead, Grant.
I was also going to speak of the quality of the houses. They don't build them the same. They're all just like stick figures.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
they're not built to last.
And that's because our goals have changed, right? Dr. Bear often talks about it used to be thought about to the 7th generation. Now it's probably thought about to this next 7 seconds, right? So all of that's changed because as we begin to lose perspective, as we begin to lose divine perspective, as we begin to lose this wisdom that we've had throughout the ages, where they actually knew more than we know now.
Yes.
but we're being told, they didn't, right? And we're so evolved now in consciousness and intellect that we know better. Um, you can leave it up to yourselves to think whether or not that's true or not.
It's so true what he just said though about the quality, about buying instead of making stuff good
Mhm.
to last, they just make it so it breaks. So you buy another one. It's just everybody throwing everything away.
And
It's horrible.
Yeah, that's just making us use more and more resources and so on, right?
You know,
So,
so true.
so the basis of all octaves is the keynote of rest, which the octave springs to express the idea which lies within the magnetic stillness of that keynote. So at the rest is a magnetic stillness. The fulcrum of the wave of musical octaves is its keynote from which all tonal changes in the octave are mathematically calculated, right? Matt, we just went over that, right? Times two, right? In wave frequencies and volume. The keynote is always in one's consciousness, whether the note is being sounded or not, is the balance of the octave. Now, at this point, I want to talk a little bit about tuning forks and the work of Eileen McCusick. I don't know if any people understand, but this is like, say, one of her tuning forks, right? And this is what you'd call an actuator. Yeah. You strike the fork, right? And this is a resonance of 174. And what Eileen says is that your body has these resonances that are natural to it that are healthy, right? But what happens is that your body, through trauma and other things, gets out of resonance, gets out of proper tuning, almost like a piano or some other instrument. And when your body hears the fork, it will auto-regulate back to the appropriate tone and resonance. So as the fork is struck, your body forms a resonance with that, and you will actually auto-tune. That's why she created what she calls the sonic slider. She's had great, and I have one too, and I think it's a really great tool that it actually is built on a golden ratio that for the tone, and that you can hit that, and has like these little boots and things you can put on it where you can rub it on your body and so on. And yet will actually bring your body back into a better stasis and a more healthy tone than it was in the past. And if you want, you can go to Eileen McCusick. I think it's called biofieldtuning.com, and look at some of her work with the tuning fork. So all tones are out of balance with it at all times, and forever desired balance. That's what I'm getting at. We're looking for this balance. When we hear the tone, we will go back into balance. No state of motion can evade the keynote of rest from which it sprang, nor can it be separated from it electrically in matter or consciously in mind. So no matter what the instrument produces octave tones, its frequency and other dimensions must be in orderliness demanded by the opening and closing spiral pairs which control those tones by conditioning them. Likewise, no matter what the instrument, whether larynx of man, string of violin, carbon wave, field, or color spectrum, its sole motivating power for producing change of dimension for the purpose of producing change of tone is electric pressure directed by desire and borrowed from the keynote of the octave stillness. So again, the desire, this is one thing that I think was also talked about last week in the alphabetic cast was, to think something will not actually bring it into existence, just to have the thought. This is something else that I think Rebecca Dawson talks about, is that thought on its own is not enough to bring something into existence. It must actually, if you put emotion with it or desire, that will bring things into existence. And so the greater the emotion, the greater the desire. So as we have so what we're really actually doing here is we're actually combining the different subtle bodies, right? We have the mental body, we have the emotional, etheric body. Desire could be the spiritual side. So as we begin to integrate our bodies, right, these subtle bodies, and actually begin to focus the energy and intent of those subtle bodies, this is how we begin to bring things into existence. So
Cool.
so no matter, okay, so So it doesn't matter what instrument we use, right? Furthermore, all power thus borrowed from one expression in any octave tone must be in balance with the opposite of that tone within which those borrowings have been deaded. So again, we're talking about the borrowings and the deading. This again is the positive and negative that Walter Russell is using as synonyms for those things. The outstanding fact of natural law must be borne in mind in considering these principles as applied to the mechanics of the universal wave, which produces the octave wave tones of the elements of matter. So with such precision that any effect produced by any of them, combination or separately, will produce that same effect always. So now we're going to get into the cosmic clock and the elements. Any questions so far of anything I've shared on, whether it be frequency, harmonics, tones, so on and so forth? All right, well, now we're going to move into the cosmic clock of elements. So again, here's the cosmic clock with our colors on it. We have our reds, we have our positives, right, our negatives, so on. 0 to 4, 4 to 0, 0 to 4, and 4 to 0. Are you guys can see the cosmic octave now, correct?
It's like 16 altogether.
Well, it's 12. I mean, this is 1, right, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 16.
So the zeros don't count as one, right?
Correct. Well, what this is, because this is broken into, right? So since you have 1, 2, 3, 4 right here instead of 3, you're ending up with, 1, 2, 3, and half of 4. So you got, so this is kind of,
I see.
you're breaking it into actually like thirds. So, in a true clock, this would be a 3, right? This would be a 6, but this is an octave. So each side's being broken down into 4, right? 0 to 4. In a time clock, it would be 16. Now, there has been some talk that there's actually, 12 elements to an octave, but I don't really want to get into all that at this point. So now we're back to something that was mentioned earlier, which is the Fibonacci sequence here. And this.
Well, the 12 elements, do you want to just talk about the 12 elements real quick in the octave for the notes?
If you want to talk about it, you can.
Well, it's just because like the reason why there's 12 and not 16 is because there's 2 notes that don't have half steps between them. And that's between the E and the F and the C and the D. So what makes up a whole scale is a whole, half, whole, half. So those are the intervals between each of the notes, whole step and half step. But that's why there's 12 and not 16, because we're missing 2 notes. But yeah.
So the elements of matter. Thank you, Grant, for that. The elements of matter. An invariable characteristic of nature is to express life-death cycles of an idea in 9 lesser interweaving cycles enfolded into one. When we think of man as an idea, we think of him as a grown-up to fullness of middle age. Until then, we think of generating man as an infant, child, and youth. Following these generating cycles come to the degenerative ones in which he gradually repays all of his borrowings from his 0 of rest and returns to 0 to gain power, to again borrow power to re-express the idea of man. What this is really showing here is the octave, but also as kind of the Fibonacci sequences, which we talked about earlier, with the chambered nautilus, or you said snail shells, or so on. So as we look at man, as we see him, right, we see him as an infant come in, grow to what Russell would say 40 to 45, and then start the degenerative cycle. We would also see this within his body, maybe within his cell structure, as we see cells that would begin as, maybe circles or spheres, as, going and oblating to less, more disc-like structures. And that, as someone would age, that's the oblating that you would see within the structures as he would come closer and closer to the death cycle, as we call it, or the negative cycle, or the radiative cycle. Again, within Walter's cosmology, there is no death, there's only the regenerative cycle. The consciousness would move on, the body would die, it would then regenerate back, and then that consciousness would seek a new form and then regenerate back again. So within Walter Russell's cosmology, there is no death, only death of the matter, right, which is the body, not death of the consciousness. The process of nature, which expresses its cycles of idea in 9 lesser cycles, is conspicuously present in the life-death cycle, right? So, that earlier table that we looked at, which was, the octave table of the elements, I like this one a little bit better because it actually shows the colors. So we can actually relate a little bit better. And also shows which is the red side, right? Red side elements, which are hot, which are positive, which are male, right? Which are gravitational. The blue side would be negative, would be female, would be cold, would be radiative, right? All these same terms are being used. Now, the one thing that I pulled from another was that the inert gases are not elements and are therefore toneless and color elements, right? Well, why are they? Because the inert gases fall on the 0 points of the wave, right? So as you see here, when you see this inert gas, right, it falls on the 0, right? Alpha non 0, 0, right? So all of these neon 0, right? So these are the inert gases which you can add to things, but they are not elements, they are inert gases.
What does that mean, inert gas?
It just means that it's toneless and colorless, that it is not an element. Okay, this is another name for a gas that inert means it actually it doesn't move, I believe. But, so inert gases will fall on the 0 point or the inflection point of the wave. So within this waveform here, right, which is what we call the sine wave, or it's broken down into the octaves, right, the steps. And it goes through these steps, which would be the radiative and gravitational side. So I'm getting to a larger one here. So say like here, where we have everything in red here, this would all be on the positive side, right? The male side. So lithium, boron, 2 what? 2 carbon, right? Right here to carbon, which is in the center, back to nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, right? Back to 0, back to neon. So helium starts, this portion of the wave off, right? Which is really from helium to carbon, which is the form that we're in, back out to neon here. So as you see the amplitude, right, the height of the wave, right, increases as we move farther and farther out. So if you were to look at this diagram, right, and you actually like drew a line, not doing what I want to do, right? Drew a line, right? That line would begin to form a cone, right? This is the cone that we've looked at, right?
Yep.
So this wave, we're seeing it in 2D here, but it's actually in 3D, right? So along these waves here, right, are all these points of the energy that's being moved through as it moves along the wave and changes polarities at certain points, right? Going from red to blue here. So it's going from positive here to negative, right? Back to negative, back to positive. So Walter Russell would say from this point to this, so this octave, this is something we talked about, is the wave cycle. The wave cycle is not like this whole wave, right? It's only the octave. So we talked about this quite a bit back of what the wave cycle actually is. The wave cycle is the octave.
It's like the 2 pieces.
Correct. the octave as it moves from trough to apex, right? Trough to apex is the wave cycle, and then from apex back to trough, right? So we have this wave that's following this line. And as we go through here, you know, not only do the, you know, does the size of the wave increase, but also the number of elements within that also increases, right? As we see it happening here until we get the isotopes down here and so on. So, you know, these are, you know, the more denser materials, gold, mercury, so lead, you know, all down here, right? As we move farther up the wave. So, you know, within this, we have the blue side elements of the color spectrum are again, what we call the negative, the female, right? The red or the positive or the male side. So as we move down, we can see within the octave how each of these elements, so the wave is forming tone, it's forming color, it's forming elements in the octaves based on the frequency and vibration that's being generated. Now, Robert Edward Grant, this was somebody who was given to me, not given to me, but referenced to me by one of our friends in the alphabetic group. And he's, like I said, he's a pharmacist. He was in the pharmaceutical industry, but began to read the work of Walter Russell and Steiner and others, and began actually to change his opinion on what way to go in the treatment and the cosmology of what he was doing. And what he came to the conclusion that sound and light are one, just as Walter Russell did. And he goes into a little bit about, you know, waveform, and if you go, that's the name of the actual video from which this snapshot is taken. So if you really want to get more into this, if you want to get into the actual geometries and the equations, Doug, this is where you need to go. And you can watch this video, which is about an hour and a half video, I think. But within that, you know, this was done in July 18th, 2020, just before a lot of this stuff started taking place, right? It's going on now. So basically, you know, he talked about there's two forms of waves. There's a transverse wave, which is really the sine wave that we've looked at, which he says corresponds to light, matter, energy, and radiation. The sine wave, it's perpendicular to the direction of the wave. So again, this is the wave that goes up and down that we talked about earlier, right? This is this, you know, where it makes this motion, right? So then what we'd have is what he would call the longitudinal or compression waves. And these are pretty much agreed upon in material science also. But so this would be the wave that looks like this, sawtooth. And this is the wave that's actually going through that shaft. And it has mass and gravitation, time, space, vacuum, and scalar. It has a sawtooth wave. It's parallel to the direction of the wave. So remember we talked about the gravitational axis that was talked about earlier in one of the earlier drawings here. Where's the gravitational axis here? Gravitational axis. There it is. So you remember this right here, the gravitational axis?
Yeah.
So that is a transverse wave, right? So, all right. No, that's not the transverse wave. That is the can't think of it. That is the longitudinal wave. So the longitudinal wave is that wave in the center, and the waves that go up and down are the transverse waves, right? So the transverse waves are the sine wave. The longitudinal waves or the compression waves is the centering wave or the shaft. Now, what makes these different? So, you know, we see within this, you know, compression wave, we see that that's where the scalar frequency is within. Now, some of you may know that I use scalar quite a bit for some of the work I do. You know, it's been said that and we were talking about, say, the Bosnian pyramids and different things that have very high healing qualities. It's also said that that pyramid generates scalar waves, right? And within scalar waves, there, we talked a little bit about when things begin to oblate, right? And what might bring them back into, condense them back into a sphere. Well, maybe scalar waves might, right? It's a compression wave. So by introduction of scalar waves onto a radiated surface that's experienced radiation or oblation or disintegration, maybe if we actually, perform a gravitational wave on it as like a scalar wave, it may bring those, which is basically a quantum wave, would bring that back into a sense of compression, which would bring it back to its spherical shape. We discussed that, I think, last week quite a bit on Planet. So, what do these waves really look like, right? Well, so a compression wave is like if you had a string or a wire, right? Maybe a wire, and you pushed on it, it would make this sawtooth shape. That's a compression wave, right? You're pushing on it. A longitudinal wave, you're actually giving it this up and down motion, right? This 90-degree motion. And as you give it that motion, that's what creates the S wave, right? Sine wave, or, the curved waves. So cycles of the elements of matter, carbon alone expresses the idea of matter. So that's why within carbon-based systems, we have the idea of matter. All the 9 octaves of the elements are stages of unfoldment and refoldment of carbon. The first 4.5 octaves lead to the maturity of carbon by the generative contraction of gravity. It is the hardest of all the other stages of its transition, having the highest melting point. The last 4.5 octaves lead from maturity through old age to disappearance at the end of the 9-octave cycle by the radiative expansion of vacuity. So as these, condense, the radiative expansion of vacuity, meaning radiating back into space, going into greater mass, actually reduces its potential and makes it into a larger volume. General activity begins at birth of carbon in the first octave with general active inner explosion speed of light, which is 186,400, right, miles per second. It ends up with the equal radioactive outer explosive speed. This speed is the limit at which motion can reproduce itself in a curved wave field before reaching zero, where motion and curvature cease. So here we actually see this diagram here in figure 72 of this, this being the wave cycle, this being down to carbon, which we saw in the other diagram here, these 0 points being the inert gases, this side being plus, this side being minus, back to the plus as the wave changes, back to the minus, right? So this is in all wave fields, but as this, and this is only one part of the octave, as this octave expands, these elements change. We saw that in a larger diagram. The amplitude also changes. We saw that forming the cone. Carbon fulfills the plan of the creator in his desire to create, but one form, the cube sphere, carbon alone crystallizes in a true cube. Now this gets back to some of our earlier things about the cubosphere, and you guys can go back and review some of those videos we did on the cubosphere, with all the qualities of the true cube and sphere fully exemplified. All other elements which crystallize as cubes are octave extensions of carbon. All such extensions occupy the 404 positions of wave amplitude, right? 404 positions are what? The octave, right? They all fulfill what we just talked about. We went over that. In carbon are all the elements of its previous stages, just as in man are all the actions and reactions of his previous stages. Hydrogen is a 1 octave younger prototype of carbon. Its form on the wave amplitude at 404, just as carbon forms a 404 1 octave ahead, We talked about that, right? Within those octaves, we saw that. Within back in this position, we can see that here, right? This being hydrogen. In hydrogen is a whole octave of element tones. Several of these have been recently discovered and wrongly named isotopes. Isotopes are split tones, such as those which a violinist can produce between full tones. I think that's a little bit what Grant was talking about with this half tone. An amazing thing happens at the point in the unfolding of carbon's life record. Hydrogen's melting point is 259 degrees below 0 centigrade, and in 1 octave, the winding up process of nature acts like a whiplash at its halfway position where generoactivity and radioactivity meet as equals. This effect tightens the winding of the carbon into such a dense substance that the melting point jumps to 3,600 degrees above 0 in that 1 octave. Nature immediately counterbalances accelerative action by dropping nitrogen, the next element beyond carbon, into a gas which melts at 210 degrees below 0 centigrade. It does not recover from the gaseous condition during the rest of the octave. The cosmic seed of carbon octave is helium. So what we're saying is that from that inert gas, that the seed is helium, right? For the carbon octave. Silicon is the 1 octave older than carbon, which is funny, right? It's silicon.
Like sand, right?
Well, what else is made from silicon?
Silicon.
Is chips made from silicon?
Oh yeah, computers.
Isn't that kind of funny how it is one stage removed from us?
Wow. That is weird.
So, I mean, and again, I'm not sure about what I'm saying here, but if this silicon is the same silicon from which computer chips and things are made on, right? Silicon-based system. It's almost that it is a natural progression, right? That we move into a computer-based system, right?
Well, what about quantum? Aren't they made of something else?
Unnatural.
Huh?
What about quantum? That's a good question.
Quantum in terms of quantum computing?
Yeah, I don't think they use. Do they still use silicon?
No, they don't.
It's like crystal, right?
Yeah, but I would say that that's a different form also, right? I mean, we have moved from carbon to silicon based. Are all computers going to be quantum based? I don't think so, right? I think that most chips that we use and most of the systems that we use are still going to be silicon based. Supercomputing is done with quantum computers, right? But for the next generation, all these robots and everything, I think they're based on chips, right? That are silicon based, not quantum based. Quantum based is like, the AI. It's like it's actually based on water and other functions.
The one thing I'm kind of resisting what you said is like it's a natural progression, and I just feel like it's not a natural progression. This is like a parasite.
Well, all I'm trying to say is it's the next level on the wave.
I don't know.
But that's what
I don't know. I think it's the death level, personally.
Well, again, that's great. I'm just saying in relation to the wave. You can have your own personal opinions on whether or not it's bad, good, or indifferent. That's not my point. My point being that it's along the wave. I'm just saying that that's the next, silicon is 1 octave older than carbon, right?
Older.
So when you look at the system here, right?
Older meaning it's been around longer?
Well, I'm not even seeing silicon here. So we got oxygen, nitrogen, boron, barium. I have to go over to this one here. So look here. So we got potassium. So here's silicon, cobalt. Carbon's down this way, I know. Let's see here. Let's look at what I just said. Carbon, nitrogen. I don't even see silicon here. Sodium. Oh, here's silicon right there. So silicon's coming after carbon. So here's carbon, right? Carbon's at the trough. Up here is silicon. Right? And metals are in between. So it is,
It's also funny that it's kind of in between the dimension too.
Well, same as carbon, right? Right. I mean, it's on the trough. It's on the trough. All I'm saying is, it seems strange, right? But that's the next, apex. Whether or not that's true, I don't know.
Or coincidence.
I think it leads to hell, actually.
Again, I think we all have our choices of which way we want to go. An amazing thing happens. Okay, so as we move into up the wave, the next one is silicon. I got to move up. Okay, so the cosmic seed of silicon octave is neon, inert gas. When carbon becomes still another octave older at the 404 position of cobalt, in the 6th octave, it divides its full tone into 10, puts isotopes tones 5 on either side. So from this point, it goes into 10. Carbon at this stage has lost much of its vitality and changes its character by thus dividing into cobalt isotopes. Its melting point has dropped to 1480 degrees, which is slightly higher than the silicon stage of carbon. Because of sharing that position with 10 others, it has lost much of its true cube sphere quality of balance, which the 404 position manifests. The evidence of that is the metallic quality of cobalt, which would be impossible in the true cube sphere position of 404 in the octave wave. The 404 position is one of balance between the pairs of metallic opposites such as iron and nickel, manganese and copper, chromium and zinc, or sodium and chlorine. When any of these pairs lose their metallic qualities, such as iron and oxygen, in iron rust, or sodium and chlorine. When any of these pairs lose their metallic qualities, such as iron and oxygen, and iron rust, or sodium and chlorine, they find both rest and balance in the stony quality of the salts they crystallize in the cubic system. If they are equal or near equal opposite pairs, sodium chloride is a good example. One can see its approximate Q cube sodium chloride, ordinary table salt, are in the distorted cube crystal of sodium chloride. So sodium iodide.
Ordinary table salt. He didn't realize how bad salt was yet.
Yeah. Well, again, I think all he's talking about is the structure of the salt, not its quality. The 4 position of the octaves of the elements in the position of rest, where any action must reach its end, its life cycle, and begin its other half. It comes to a point of rest before returning to a point of rest, and as all actions and reactions in nature do. At one active of still further aging, carbon becomes rhodium and again climbs to its amplitude position at 404 by 5 efforts and descends by 5 more. Rhodium is more vital than cobalt for its melting point is 1950. So as we see this, right now, we're actually beginning to see this, 0-4 position into an actual, waveform with the positive and negative along the gravitational axis, is what he called it, right? Or we actually called this the dynamic axis, with this being a static axis, which acts at a 90-degree angle to the gravitational axis, which is forming the wave to the 0 point. And again, in the spiral forms of positive going in a clockwise, negative going in a counterclockwise direction. So this would go down into matter, out into space. So again, this is just going through, along the wavelengths as these, he's just really expanding into where do we go, from one to the next. So you can look on the graph itself to see, what he's calling, these items and their cosmic seed. A small telescopic instrument, the spinthariscope, contains a needle upon which a microscopic portion of radium has been placed in front of a fluorescent screen. By looking through its lens in the dark, one can see the shedding of the cosmic seed, the slowly dying carbon in the radium stage as the rays of these cosmic seeds bombard the screen. The effect is beautiful, like looking into the heavens of a starry night. Carbon never comes within perception atomium, but its efforts to reach thorium are evidenced in the uranium group of isotopes, of which there are 15 before thorium is reached. Out of this group, several have been found and made use. Okay. Radioactivity has so nearly reached its maximum at this point that the speed of the cosmic seed shed by these isotopes has been measured at 180,000 miles per second, which is approximately the speed of light nearing its ending point at thorium, where the octave again begins at a alpha naught. So, you know, the discussions we have of whether or not you really want to swim in a radioactive pool, I would say based on wave dynamics, I wouldn't do it. Just
Right.
because of the wave function that's happening of radioactivity, of what he's talking about here, of what causes radioactivity. Now, whether or not that pool actually had radioactive water, I don't know. But if it actually had radioactivity, if it had uranium and within the water was captured the wave cycle of radioactivity, I do not believe it would be beneficial to the body. I do believe it would have a detrimental effect. But again, I'm
Oh,
not,
I mean, that guy did it for years.
again, that's one story, Doug.
One guy, that's right.
I mean, yeah,
Who knows if he really swam in anything also?
exactly. I mean, I don't know.
No.
So, but well, what I'm saying is if I just look at it on a wave function form, and what Walter Russell's saying is that would produce a wave in me, or could produce a wave in me based on, you know, my condition at the time, that would not be beneficial, but would be very harmful in its action. So that concludes the universal octave. Any questions or any comments on the universal octave before
Holy shit.
we move on? We're going to be done for today, and we're going to move into the inert gases. So your question of what are inert gases, we're going to answer next week, Doug, and get more into that. But I hope the universal octave has been made a little clearer for all of us within this. All right, so this is Will Harold, the energy hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you with the Secret of Light group. Please like and subscribe, and also please write some comments about what you thought about our discussion today and whether or not it was helpful or not. So with that, I will stop the recording, and we can begin to move on from what we're doing here.
Mm.
Okay, come on. There we go.